When I questioned why I wasn't invited to my niece's birthday yet again, Dad said, "You're not family, just a wallet." My aunt agreed, saying, "We're fine without you." So I quietly cut the payments. The party went on, and the report followed. I learned I hadn't been invited to my niece's 10th birthday by scrolling Instagram, which honestly felt like a punch to the gut. Lisa had uploaded a video of Chloe blowing out her candles, ringed by cousins, aunts, uncles, and what looked like half the block crammed into the yard. There were balloons everywhere, a bounce house, and a long table buried under gifts. Everybody was there, all smiling, all celebrating, and the only person missing was me. I checked my phone right away, flipping through texts and messages, but there was nothing at all. No invite, no heads up, not even a quick, "Sorry, we forgot you." I called Lisa. "Mike, hey, what's going on?" She said. I told her I'd just seen the party online and that it looked like a good time. Then I paused and said I hadn't gotten an invitation. There was a beat of silence before she said, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. We had limited space," and I cut in and told her she had a bounce house and at least 30 people there. She brushed it off, saying it just worked out that way and telling me not to make it a thing, repeating it twice like a warning. I told her to put Dad on the phone. She hesitated, said he was busy, and I told her again, firmer this time. After some muffled arguing, Dad came on, his voice loose and slurred. "Mike, hey buddy, you should see this party, it's great." I asked him straight up why I hadn't been invited to Chloe's birthday. He played dumb at first, then said Lisa had to make some tough choices. I reminded him I was her brother and Chloe's uncle. He sighed and said, "Let's be honest. You're not really family in the way that counts for this stuff." My chest went cold, and I asked him what that was supposed to mean. He said it meant I was more like a resource, someone they leaned on when they needed help. A wallet. Hearing that word out loud made my stomach drop. I told him I'd been paying his mortgage for a year and a half. He said they appreciated it, but that didn't give me a say in family events. I couldn't even form words after that. He told me not to take it personally and explained that my financial help kept the family afloat, so that was how it worked. Then he hung up. A year and a half earlier, Dad had lost his job when the manufacturing plant shut down, and at 58 he couldn't find anything close to what he used to make. He'd called me back then, his voice shaking as he said the mortgage was $2,400 a month and he was about to lose the house, the same house where Mom died 5 years earlier. I told him immediately I'd help and cover it until he got back on his feet. I was earning $75,000 as a software engineer and figured I could manage if I tightened my belt. I moved into a cheaper apartment, stopped eating out, and drove my 12-year-old Honda until it practically begged for mercy. Every single month, like clockwork, $2,400 went straight into his account, never late. At first, Dad would text to say thanks, but over time the gratitude faded. The messages turned into pressure, asking if I could send it early or reminding me it was due by the 3rd. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being his son and became an ATM. My phone buzzed with a message from Aunt Carol saying she was sorry I couldn't make it to the party and that Chloe had asked about me. That hit hard, knowing my niece noticed even if the adults didn't care. I called Carol and asked why I hadn't been invited. She said Lisa needed to keep the list manageable, and I reminded her there were 30 people there. She said they were focusing on close family. I pointed out I was Lisa's brother, and the line went quiet. Finally, she told me, honestly, they were fine without me and that these gatherings were about the core family, plus I was busy with my own life anyway. I told her quietly that I paid Dad's mortgage. She said they appreciated it, but that didn't mean I needed to be included in everything. I asked when the last time was that I'd been invited to anything at all, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Lisa's birthday, and she didn't answer. I asked if stopping the payments would suddenly get me an invite, and she said that wasn't fair, then immediately warned me I couldn't stop because Dad needed the money. When I pointed out that answered my question, she told me if I felt that way maybe I shouldn't come to family events because they didn't need negativity. Then she hung up. I sat there for a long while before opening my banking app and staring at the recurring payment, $2,400 scheduled for the 1st of every month. Another Instagram story popped up showing Chloe cutting the cake, Dad laughing in the background, all of them enjoying a party I paid for in a house I was funding while being told I wasn't family. I canceled the payment, then texted Dad to say the mortgage payments were stopping immediately and he had 30 days to figure something else out. I blocked his number, Lisa's, Carol's, and deleted Instagram altogether. If I wasn't family and only a wallet, then that wallet was officially closed. The first week afterward felt strange, not because of guilt. I expected that but didn't feel it, but because of relief. Seeing an extra $2,400 in my account felt unreal after being broke for so long. Jake, a guy I worked with, noticed and said I seemed lighter, and I told him I'd made some changes, good ones I hoped. My phone stayed quiet since the payment wasn't due for another 3 weeks. On day 8, an unknown number left a voicemail from Lisa using a friend's phone, yelling that Dad said I'd canceled the payment and accusing me of being insane and risking him losing the house. I deleted it. Another call came from Carol on a different number, calling me cruel and saying Mom would be ashamed, which stung even though I knew it was cheap. I deleted that too. They kept trying from work phones, friends' phones, blocked numbers, always leaving messages, and I deleted every one. That's the thing about being someone's wallet. You only matter once the money stops. On day 12, Dad emailed me a long, rambling message full of guilt, anger, and desperation, reminding me he raised me, fed me, and accusing me of taking away the last piece of Mom, and even blaming me for hurting Chloe. I replied with one line, telling him he said I wasn't family and that I was just a wallet, and that this wallet was closed. He wrote back fast, claiming he didn't mean it, that he'd been drinking, and that I was being sensitive. That word hit a nerve, the same one Mom used to use whenever I pointed out how differently they treated Lisa and me. I didn't answer. On day 15, they went public, with Lisa posting on Facebook for everyone to see that some people valued money over family, and that her brother Mike had stopped helping their father, putting the house where their mother died at risk all because he was bitter about missing one party. This was what selfishness looked like to everyone else, at least according to the comments that flooded in. People piled on fast, saying how awful it was and how my poor father deserved better. Carol shared the post with a note about being heartbroken, adding that family is supposed to support each other, not walk away over bruised feelings. Nobody mentioned the 18 straight months I'd paid the mortgage, not the $43,000, not a single word about me being treated like nothing more than a wallet. Jake saw the post and called me right away, asking if it was real. I told him that I'd been covering Dad's mortgage for a year and a half and still didn't even get invited to a kid's birthday party, among plenty of other things. He asked if I wanted him to comment and clear the air, but I told him no, that they could keep their version of the story. Everyone thought I was the villain, but everyone who actually mattered already knew how invisible I'd been. On day 23, a registered letter showed up from a lawyer, with Dad threatening to sue me for breaking a verbal agreement. I called the number listed and got a receptionist who said it was Morrison and Associates and that they'd sent a cease and desist regarding me. The lawyer explained my father claimed I'd made a binding promise, then asked if there was anything in writing. I said no, and after a pause he admitted there was no contract and that helping didn't obligate me forever. He said he'd pass that along, and I tossed the letter in the trash. By day 28, with the payment due in 2 days, my phone wouldn't stop ringing from unknown numbers at all hours, and the voicemails turned frantic. Lisa left one saying Chloe was crying and begging not to lose Grandpa's house, asking if I really wanted to be that uncle. Dad left another saying he was sorry for what he said and begging me to help because the bank was calling. He said sorry, but never actually said he was wrong, just sorry the consequences were real, and I deleted it. Day 30 started with 17 missed calls, but I made coffee and went to work anyway. At 11, an email came through with a photo attached, showing a notice taped to Dad's front door about default and foreclosure starting in 30 days, followed by a text from an unknown number asking if I was happy now. I stared at that picture for a long time, thinking about 18 months of payments, about being called a wallet, about being shut out while I kept everything running, then typed one word, yes, and blocked the number. I was done apologizing for boundaries and done feeling bad for not letting myself be used anymore, because their crisis wasn't my job to fix. They had 30 days from the foreclosure notice, and I gave them silence instead, no replies, no deals, no do-overs. For the first time in a year and a half, I started actually living my own life, and that extra $2,400 a month felt like breathing after being underwater. I moved into a better one-bedroom with real sunlight and a dishwasher, bought clothes that weren't from clearance racks, and went out to eat without checking my balance first, small changes that somehow felt huge. Jake noticed and said I looked happier, and I told him I felt lighter, like I'd finally set something heavy down. He asked if I'd heard from them, and I said they kept trying from new numbers every day, all of which I blocked. When he asked if I felt guilty, I thought hard and realized I didn't, because what I felt instead was free. 3 weeks after the foreclosure notice, things escalated again when Lisa somehow found my work email and begged me to help because Dad was desperate and eviction was coming, saying Chloe cried every night and asking if this was really who I wanted to be. I forwarded it to HR, explained the situation, and they blocked her address. Then a handwritten letter arrived at my new place from Dad, saying he was begging, that he'd been wrong, that he took me for granted, and that this was Mom's house and her memory, and he pleaded with me not to let his mistakes cost him everything. I read it once and put it in a drawer, not thrown away and not answered, just kept, maybe as proof or maybe as closure, I wasn't sure yet. In the 4th week, it got stranger when an unknown number called, and something made me pick up, only to hear Chloe's small voice on the line. My heart stopped as she asked why I wouldn't help Grandpa, and if she'd done something wrong. And I told her no, absolutely not. But she said her mom told her I was being mean and didn't care about family anymore. I explained as simply as I could that this was adult stuff between me and her grandpa, and when she said he was going to lose his house, and that it was my fault, I asked if her mom had told her I'd been paying the mortgage for a year and a half. She didn't even know what a mortgage was, so I explained it was money for the house and that I'd been paying it every month. And I told her what her grandpa said about me only being good for money, not birthdays or holidays. She said that was mean, and I agreed, telling her it hurt, which was why I stopped paying. After a long pause, she apologized and said she didn't know, and I told her none of it was her fault. She said she'd wanted me at her party and asked why I wasn't there, and when I told her I hadn't been invited, she said that wasn't fair, and I agreed. She thanked me, then asked if I could help Grandpa anyway, even though he'd been mean, and I told her sometimes adults have to make hard choices and that Grandpa had to figure this one out himself. She said okay, told me she loved me, and I told her I loved her too before she hung up, leaving me sitting there feeling awful, not because I was wrong, but because they dragged a 10-year-old into it. 5 minutes later, Lisa called from the same number, and this time, I answered. "How dare you?" Lisa snapped, her voice trembling with anger as she shouted into the phone. "How dare you tell Chloe that Dad called you a wallet? She's 10 years old." I told her she was the one who put Chloe on the phone in the first place, and that she was the one using her own kid as leverage. Lisa shot back that Chloe wanted to talk to me, and I reminded her that she'd told a 10-year-old it was my fault her grandpa was losing his house, dumping that weight straight onto a child. She said it was my fault because I was the one who stopped paying, and I said yeah. After 18 months of being shut out of everything while I kept their lives running, after Dad looked me in the eye and said I wasn't really family. She tried to soften it, saying he didn't mean it, but I told her he meant every word, just like Carol did, just like she did when she didn't invite me to Chloe's birthday. She cried and said it was just one party, that I was tearing the family apart over one party, and I told her it wasn't one party. It was every party, every holiday, every family event for years. I just didn't see it because I was too busy being their ATM. She was crying hard now, begging, saying they needed the money and Dad needed it. And I told her she didn't need my money. She needed to figure out her own life. When she said they had 2 weeks before the bank took the house, I told her then she should spend those 2 weeks solving it instead of calling me. I hung up and blocked that number too. The next day, Jake called me and said I needed to see something, then sent a link to a GoFundMe titled "Help Save a Family Home," with Lisa's name on it, Dad's picture, and a photo of the house. The description talked about my father being a hardworking man who lost his job through no fault of his own and was struggling to keep the family home where his late wife lived and where his granddaughter celebrated birthdays, saying foreclosure was coming and asking the community to help save a precious family memory. The goal was $25,000, and they'd raised $340. I read it carefully and noticed what wasn't there. No mention of 18 months of payments from me. No mention of $43,000 already paid. Just a hard-working man and a struggling family. The comments were full of prayers and talk about family being everything. People saying they'd donated what they could. I showed Jake and said of course they left me out, because it didn't fit their story. He asked if I was going to comment and set the record straight, And I thought about blasting everything out there with receipts and screenshots and the words "just a wallet." But then I remembered something Mom used to say, that the truth doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be true. I told him no, they could raise the money or not. Either way, it wasn't my problem. The fundraiser picked up a little steam through their church, and by the end of the week, they were at $4,000, still miles away from what they needed with 1 week left. I watched the total crawl up, saw the supportive comments, saw Lisa posting updates thanking everyone, and I knew it wouldn't be enough, and for the first time I accepted that it didn't have to be. 2 days before the foreclosure deadline, I got an unexpected message request on LinkedIn from someone named Jennifer Marsh, a last name that made me pause. I opened it and read her message saying she was Dad's cousin from Portland, had heard about the house through family gossip, and wanted to talk. I stared at it for a long moment, then accepted and replied, and we met for coffee the next day. Jennifer was in her mid-50s, well-dressed, with kind eyes that reminded me of Mom, and she thanked me for meeting her, saying she knew it was strange. I told her I'd never even heard Dad mention her, and she said they weren't close and hadn't been for years after a falling out. She asked to hear my side because she'd already heard the family version, so I told her everything: the 18 months of payments, the birthday party, the wallet comment, Carol saying they were fine without me, the harassment, Chloe's phone call. She listened quietly, then nodded and said it sounded exactly like her cousin Robert and his sister Carol. And when I asked if she was surprised, she said not at all, explaining they'd done something similar to her 20 years earlier by borrowing money for a business, promising to repay it, then accusing her of being greedy and unsupportive when she asked for it back. She never saw the $15,000 again, money that had been everything she'd saved back then, and hearing that felt like proof I wasn't crazy or cruel. She said she was sorry it happened to me, pulled out her phone, and said she'd seen the GoFundMe and noticed how many details were missing, really all of them. Then she asked me honestly if I wanted them to lose the house, and after thinking it through I said I didn't want Chloe to suffer, but Dad, Lisa, and Carol needed to learn people aren't ATMs, and you can't treat someone like garbage and expect endless help. She said that was fair and told me she thought I'd done the right thing, that boundaries aren't cruel, they're healthy. And when I joked she should tell that to Facebook, she said Facebook didn't know the whole story, but I did, and that was what mattered. We talked for another hour about family and moving on, and when we stood up she hugged me and told me I wasn't alone and to call her if I ever needed someone who understood. I drove home lighter than I'd felt in weeks, not because anything was fixed, but because someone finally saw me. The next day, the foreclosure deadline arrived, and I woke up to silence, no calls, no texts, just nothing, and the fundraiser sat at $6,200, still nowhere close. At 3 in the afternoon, my doorbell rang, and when I opened it, I found Carol standing there, looking exhausted with no makeup, her hair pulled back, a wrinkled sweater hanging off her shoulders. She said my name and told me we needed to talk, asked if she could come in, and I told her no. She pleaded, and I just stood there. 5 minutes, she said, then corrected herself. 2 minutes, right here, standing on my doorstep with red eyes and shaking hands. She reminded me the foreclosure was happening today at 3 o'clock and that they were $6,000 short, saying that was all they needed. I told her no. I reminded her she'd said they were fine without me, that I wasn't core family, and asked why she'd want money from someone who apparently didn't count. She said she was angry and hadn't meant it, and I told her yes, she had, not just once but for years. Tears filled her eyes as she said it was one comment at a party and asked if I was really going to ruin Dad's life over that. I told her it wasn't one comment. It was 18 months of being treated like an ATM while being shut out of everything else. She said they thought I was busy, and I told her no, they thought I was convenient, visible when they needed money and invisible when they didn't. She begged again, promising she'd pay me back, but I told her I didn't want her money. I wanted her to understand that people aren't wallets. She asked if I was really going to let him lose everything, and I said no, she was, because she spent a month harassing me instead of finding solutions. She stood there crying and told me she hoped I could live with myself. I said I could, and asked if she could. Then she left. I shut the door with my hands shaking, not from guilt, but from finally holding my ground. At 3:15 p.m., my phone buzzed from an unknown number, and I heard crying before Dad's voice came through saying they'd taken it, that the house was gone. I didn't say anything. He begged, saying we could still fix it if I just helped, and I told him no, that he wasn't my father in that moment. He was the man who called me a wallet and said I wasn't family. He said he was drunk and sorry, and I told him he was sorry. He said it out loud, not that he meant it. He said that wasn't fair, and I told him none of it was fair, but it wasn't my problem anymore, then hung up and blocked the number. I opened a bottle of good wine that night and didn't feel bad about it. 2 weeks later, Jennifer messaged me to say she'd seen on Facebook that they were having a fresh start party at Sarah's place and thought I should know. A party, of course. I asked for the address and time, and she sent it over, Saturday at 2, family celebration, new beginnings. From Jennifer, I'd learned Dad had bought a new car 3 months earlier, financed at a ridiculous rate he couldn't afford, and the repo company had been looking for it, with Dad hiding it at Sarah's. The repo truck was scheduled for Saturday, and I didn't cause that. I just knew it was coming and made sure I was there to see it. At 1:45 p.m., I parked down the street, far enough to stay out of sight, but close enough to watch. The driveway was full of cars, balloons tied to the mailbox, people carrying dishes inside. At 2:47, a flatbed tow truck turned onto the street, and I sat up straighter as it stopped in front of Sarah's house. The driver checked his tablet, got out, and knocked. Sarah answered, her face shifting from cheerful to panicked as she yelled inside. Dad came out shouting, guests followed, and the party froze. The driver showed paperwork. Dad tried to block the car. Linda came out yelling. Sarah was on her phone, but none of it mattered because the driver had the documents. Dad's black Charger, the one he bought to feel good about himself, rolled onto the flatbed while Dad stood there helpless, losing it in front of everyone at their fresh start party. Sarah cried. Linda screamed. Dad looked crushed, and guests started slipping away fast, awkward and quiet, some filming on their phones. That video would be everywhere by dinner. When the truck pulled off and the driveway emptied, I watched Sarah standing there alone, then started my car and drove home. An hour later, Devin called and asked if I'd seen Facebook, then told me the repo truck had taken Dad's car right in the middle of the party and that it was blowing up online. He asked if I'd known, and I said I knew it was coming, just not exactly when. He called it savage, and I said no, it was consequences. People started asking why Dad had a new car if he couldn't pay his mortgage, and I said good, let them ask. That night, videos from different angles popped up, and the comments shifted as people started connecting dots, wondering how someone who couldn't afford a house could finance a Charger. Sarah posted asking for privacy, but the questions kept coming about where I was, why I wasn't at family events, and whether I'd been helping financially. Their story was falling apart, and I didn't say a word, just watched. Sunday morning, Jennifer texted to say Dad was raising money for the car now, another GoFundMe, which I looked up to see titled, Help Robert Get His Car Back, claiming wrongful repossession with an $8,000 goal and zero raised. The comments were brutal, asking how he'd lost his house but bought a car, where my mortgage money went, and why this family kept asking for handouts. The truth finally surfaced not because I shared it, but because they couldn't keep lying consistently. I closed the app and blocked Facebook, done watching. 3 weeks after the repo mess, my life felt calm in a way it hadn't for a long time, with no more unknown calls, no desperate emails, no relatives showing up unannounced. They finally understood. I started therapy, not out of guilt, but because Devin suggested it might help, and Dr. Martinez, a sharp woman in her 50s with kind eyes and zero patience for nonsense, summed it up in our third session by saying my family used me as an ATM for 18 months and turned me into the villain when I stopped. When she asked how that made me feel, and I said free, she smiled and told me that wasn't wrong at all, that boundaries are healthy. Work improved too, and without the stress of someone else's mortgage, I focused, got promoted to senior developer, and came with a raise. Devin took me out to celebrate, pointing out my new apartment, savings, and how well I was doing, and when I said it felt strange, like waiting for something to break, he told me that was just my nervous system adjusting after survival mode. One Saturday morning, my doorbell rang, and when I checked the peephole, I saw Emma standing there with a woman I didn't recognize. I opened the door and Emma's face lit up the second she saw me, yelling, "Uncle Nathan," like nothing else in the world mattered. The woman with her stepped forward and introduced herself as Rebecca, explaining she was Sarah's friend and that Emma had begged her to bring her over. I told her it was okay and invited them in, and Rebecca said she'd wait out in the car. Emma turned serious fast, standing there with her hands clenched like she had something important to say, and told me she needed to see me. I asked if her mom knew she was here, and she shook her head and said she'd be mad, but she didn't care. I sat across from her and asked what was going on, and she immediately apologized, saying she was sorry for everything, for what they said to me, and for being used to make me feel bad. I told her gently that she was 10 years old and none of this was her fault, and she said she knew but felt bad about how she talked to me on the phone, then said Rebecca had explained what really happened, how I paid for Grandpa's house, how I wasn't invited to her party, and how Grandpa called me a wallet. I told her her mom and Grandpa made choices and those choices had consequences, and that it wasn't abandonment, it was boundaries. She asked what boundaries were, and I explained it was deciding what you will and won't accept from people, even family. She thought about that and nodded, saying it made sense, then asked if she could still see me even if her mom said no. My chest tightened and I told her I didn't want to make things harder for her at home, and she said it was already hard, that her mom and Grandpa fought all the time now about money, the house, and me, then looked at me with eyes that seemed way too old for 10 and said her mom blamed me for everything falling apart, but she thought things were already falling apart and I just stopped holding them together. I told her she was pretty smart, and she smiled and asked if we could do something together like get ice cream. I said yes, but told her I'd text her mom afterwards so she knew where she was, and Emma said her mom would probably yell, and I told her that was on me, not her. We went to the ice cream shop near my apartment and spent an hour just talking about school, her friends, and her drawings, and before she left she hugged me and thanked me for not giving up on her, and I told her I never could. After they left, I texted Sarah to let her know Emma had come by, that she was safe, and that if she wanted to talk about boundaries for future contact I was open to it. An hour later she replied furious, telling me to stay away from her daughter, and I didn't answer, just forwarded the message to Rebecca with a thank you for bringing Emma, and a note to let me know if Emma ever needed anything. 6 months later, my life barely looked like the same one, with a new apartment that had 2 bedrooms, a better car, and actual savings in the bank. I started dating again, nothing serious yet, but I realized when you're not drained emotionally and financially, you actually have energy for other people. Emma and I texted now and then, and Sarah didn't like it, but had stopped trying to shut it down. Dad had moved in with Sarah, and according to Jennifer it was tense, with constant fights about money. I ran into Linda at the grocery store one day, and when we made eye contact she looked away fast and left without a word, no apology and no confrontation, which was fine because I didn't need anything from her anymore. Over drinks one night, Devin pointed out how wild it was that a year earlier I'd been broke, stressed, and miserable, and now I was doing better than ever, and I told him it was the best decision I'd ever made. He asked if I meant cutting them off, and I said no, setting boundaries, because there's a difference, and we toasted to that. That same night, I got a text from an unknown number from Dad using a friend's phone, saying he was really sorry for everything, that I'd been right, and that he'd treated me like a wallet and taken me for granted. I stared at it for a long time, wanting to believe him, but also knowing words don't always mean change. So I replied that I appreciated the apology, but wasn't ready to rebuild the relationship yet. Maybe someday, but not now. Then blocked the number. Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation, and boundaries don't make you cruel, they make you healthy. 2 years after I stopped paying Dad's mortgage, I bought my first house. Nothing huge, just a 3-bedroom with a nice yard. And threw a housewarming party where Devin came, Jennifer came. Rebecca brought Emma with Sarah's permission, along with co-workers and new friends who knew me for who I was, not what I could give. Devin raised a toast saying the best investment isn't in other people's houses, but in yourself, and everyone cheered. Emma pulled me aside and told me she was proud of me, and I told her I was proud of her too. And when she asked why I said for being brave enough to see the truth, something she said she learned from me, that sometimes walking away is the strongest thing you can do. I looked at this now 12-year-old kid who'd figured out what took me 30 years to learn and told her she was going to be okay, and she smiled and said so was I. And she was right, because I stopped being a wallet and started being a person, and that changed everything.